Hi, I'm Dr. David Perl from limerence.net and welcome to this video on growing and raising self-awareness. This is such an important topic and it's at the heart of this program on overcoming and recovering from limerence. Why is that? Well, if we're not aware of ourselves and how we are working, how we're operating, then it's very difficult to make change. And in my judgment, most people are running around on this planet with very little awareness of themselves. So this quality of self-awareness, the ability to reflect on why am I doing what I do? It's one of the foundational building blocks of growing ourselves. The analogy I like to use is that of a computer operating system. A computer at its heart has an operating system that tells it how to work. It may be Windows, it may be Mac, it might be Linux, it could be one of many things. In my experience, most people have no concept of what operating system they're running on. Let's take a real basic look then at the human brain. This is not going to be a lesson on neuroanatomy, but we're just going to take a real surface level look at the brain. So there's three levels of which the brain operates at. The most foundational and fundamental that develops first in the womb is what we call the instinctual brain, the reptilian brain. And this is right at the very core of deep inside our brain. And this controls things like our respiration, our heart rate, all our automatic bodily functions, the physiological functions, and there are thousands upon thousands of these that are operating, and they're not operating with any level of conscious awareness or control by us. I mean, we don't stop to have to think, oh, I must breathe, or my heart must beat. It just does it on its own. And those generally, by and large, those processes are very hard to control. Some of those, like heart rate, can be controlled by very deep meditation. But by and large, they're hard to control at a conscious level. And then the next level of the brain to develop is what we call the midbrain. And this forms over the top of the reptilian brain. And this is the emotional or limbic brain, the midbrain. And this is where our feelings come from, our emotions. And emotions are energy in motion. And the core emotions that we have are generally fear, joy, sadness, anger, guilt, shame. All our feelings, or most of our feelings, can be categorized into those core central emotions. Or sometimes we say mad, bad, glad, and sad. So that's where the feelings live. And then finally, the last layer of the brain that developed and that really separates us from other animals is that because we have such a larger part of this brain, is what we call the neocortex, the new cortex. And we have a much larger neocortex in us than us compared to other animals. And it is this part of the brain that gives us all the wonderful human attributes to think, to rationalize, to understand, language, to communicate, that really separates us from other animals. Now that developmentally is the last part to evolve. And it also has the least control. It's very hard to think ourselves out of our feelings. Because our feelings come from a more primitive level, they're much harder to control. They're far more instinctual. A great example of those instinctual feelings is the fight or flight mechanism. And I'm sure many of you have heard of this, where if we're threatened, we suddenly get that surge of adrenaline. It's the fight or flight, or what we now know to be fight, flight, freeze, or faint, because there are other ways that some people operate as well. And this is relevant to limerence as well, and I'll come to that in a moment. But with this is hardwired. It's an evolutionary adaptive mechanism that we evolved tens of thousands of years ago. If we were walking down a path as a hunter or a gatherer, and we were looking for things, and suddenly a saber-toothed tiger jumped out from the side, we would either have to run for our lives or we would have to fight for our lives. And we would have a surge of adrenaline which would which would help the body. It would send more blood to the muscles. It would decrease blood to the gut and the bladder. It would constrict the pupils so we could see more clearly. It's an adaptive mechanism to help us to survive, because everything about the human is about survival and procreation. So it's hardwired into us. We cannot think our ways out of that adaptive mechanism. So that's the fight or flight mechanism. But why is it relevant to limerence? Because so many people report not just fight or fight, but it's the freeze or faint. It's the freeze. It's the bunny in the headlight. And I remember a colleague once saying to me, after I had an interaction with my limerent object, and she was there, my colleague was there at the same time, she said to me afterwards, "Are you okay? You were like a bunny in a headlight in that meeting." And it's that freeze where we become hypervigilant and we get frozen. We don't know how to respond. We don't run or we don't fight. And the faint mechanism, the freeze or faint, that's another interesting one, where in the wild you'll see sometimes an animal will just drop to the floor and play dead. It will faint, hoping that the aggressor, the predator, is going to just leave them, go on to something else perhaps. We also have to understand a bit about the unconscious, because in my experience, most of what we do comes at a level much lower down than at a conscious level. And it's a bit like an iceberg, where 90% of what goes on is below the surface. And I touched on this in an earlier video. But at a conscious level, we have some planning, creativity, there's some thinking, there's some willpower there. But below the level, so much more is going on that we're not aware of. It's our past memories, our past experiences, our dreams. It's the transgenerational trauma that we carry, our own early life trauma. It's our repressed memories that we've buried, repressed or suppressed. Repressed is where we unconsciously push them down. Suppressed is where we consciously push them down because they're too difficult to deal with. There's all our judgments. There's the automatic bodily functions as well. All that is going on at an unconscious level. And we have little control. Let me give you a good example of that. I mean, my relationship with my father, I've been quite open about, and we've gone through our ups and downs, and now it's at quite a good level. However, a couple of days after I speak to him, I always seem to develop a real deep anger, and my body comes out in aches and pains. And this is nothing at a conscious level. It's something that my relationship with him, as I said, has been repaired as best it can. However, there's something unconsciously still going on in my relationship with him, where what I sense is happening is I pick up on all his unprocessed anger. He has a lot of unprocessed anger in my judgment, which is understandable given he's done no work on his own Holocaust trauma. And this can be summed up in that beautiful quote by Carl Jung. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And I think that is so true. So what is self-awareness? Well, a good definition is it's the ability to step back and look at ourselves. It's to wonder, what am I doing and why? To step back and reflect on, what am I thinking and why? And to then also stop and reflect on, what am I feeling and why? And the key in all of this is to do it consciously, to do it with awareness. So how do we get more self-aware? Well, first off, I think we need to understand our mindsets. Where do they come from? Our beliefs, our mindsets. As Marcel Proust once so eloquently said, the real magic of discovery lies not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And William James also said the greatest revolution of our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. And here's just a couple of examples of how sometimes our unconscious minds can deceive us. Have a look at this picture. What do you notice about it? I'll leave it up for a few seconds. Well, the observant ones would have noticed that the word a appears twice in the first one, the in the second, and the in the third. They all appear twice. Most people don't see it because their brains just filter out what they expect to see or what they want to see. And this is an interesting picture here as well. What do you see here? Is it a young woman or an old woman? Or perhaps you see both. Again, have a look and see if you can see both images. So what happens then when we take in data? And we take in every second massive amounts of data. And this data gets filtered by the brain. And it's filtered by our life experiences, by our mindsets, by our beliefs, by our habits, by our experiences. All this filtering is predicated by our past life experience. That creates our reality. But our reality might be different to anybody else's reality. In fact, it will be, because our reality is unique to us. So what are the rules of mindsets? Well, we create what we see. The same data can give rise to more than one reality. We see what we want to see or what we expect to see. We tend to hold on to what we like and what we know. All mindsets affect our behavior and our feelings. And finally, most mindsets do contain a kernel of truth. And this is where this interrelationship comes in between knowing the mindset, see the behavior, feel the feeling, or the interaction between thoughts, feelings, behaviors. These three elements are closely interrelated. Thoughts and feelings are hard to control, but what we do have more control over is how we behave. And with limerence, again, this is so crucial, because whilst we might feel these strong feelings and have these thoughts going through our head, these crazy thoughts, we do have an element of control over how we respond, however difficult that may be. So here's an exercise for you to do, and there'll be some notes in the reading section accompanying this video on really unpacking your mindsets. Take a mindset, a belief that you have, and describe it in as much detail as you can. Put this on a piece of paper. How does this mindset affect your behavior? Again, be as specific as you can. Number 3, how long have you had this mindset for? Describe in much detail how long this mindset has existed for. How strong is this mindset from 1 to 10? 1 being very mild, 10 being it defines you. And then write down, how does this mindset serve you? How does it benefit you? Think back to when the mindset first started. Where did you get it from? And then think about, what does this mindset stop you from doing? What does it stop you seeing? Maybe the mindset is designed to stop you feeling. So many of our mindsets are distractions, diversions away from us having to feel deeper feelings. And then, if you start letting go of this mindset, what new opportunities come in? Have a go at that. Unpack a mindset. Maybe it's one to do with limerence. Maybe it's a belief that you have around your limerent object. Run through that process to unpack the mindset, to really start understanding what perhaps lies beneath the surface. So how do we grow self-awareness? How do we become more self-aware? Well, the first thing is, as we've just done, is to understand our mindsets. Really start thinking about your beliefs, the judgments that you hold about others. And so much of our judgments and our beliefs reside in our shadow, the parts we hide, deny, and repress. They're things that we don't want to look at, and yet they're in all human beings. See how honest you can be initially with yourself, and then perhaps take a risk with a trusted friend, a mentor, a therapist, and start being more open about the beliefs and judgments that you hold, those mindsets. Number 2, self-practice. Review the day. At the end of each day, just take a few moments to self-reflect on what went well, what didn't go well. What could you have done better? What did you learn about yourself? Just think about what your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors were around those episodes. What did you do? What could you have done differently? What mindsets did you hold about that situation? And how might you have done something differently? Mindfulness. Again, we touched on this in a previous video. But start practicing the art of mindfulness, trying to be more present in the here and now, not worrying so much about what's going to happen in the future or what happened in the past. There are short courses that you can do on developing self-awareness. Have a look on the internet to see what exists in your area or what might be online. And a great way to grow self-awareness is to find a coach or a therapist, because in that process you're getting feedback of how to grow. And journaling is another great way to grow self-awareness, a self-reflective journal where every day you're spending 10 minutes just writing about your day, about your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors, and what you're learning about yourself. And it's a great way to reflect back on your own journey as to how you're growing, how you're progressing. I also want to look at a really interesting model, which for me, I think summarizes this quest for self-awareness, self-development. And it's called the Johari window. The Johari window looks at the relationship between what we show or don't show to others and what others see or don't see in us. And this is drawn on 2 axes on a graph. And on the graph, you can see that there's the parts that are known to self on the top left, and the top right is the parts that are unknown to self. They're the parts that we're not aware of, perhaps our unconscious parts. And then on the other axis on the top left is the parts known to others. So that's the parts that others see. And then further down on the bottom left is the parts that are unknown to others. They're the parts that we don't let others see. Now, if we look at these 2 boxes, the parts that we know, so known to self and known to others, these are the parts that are what we call the public self, the persona, the parts that we show to the world, that we're comfortable in letting be known. This is who I am. And then at the top right are the parts that we don't see, unknown to self, but others do see. And these are our blind spots, the blind self. So things that others see, but we don't see them, the blind spots. And then on the bottom left, the parts that we know, so known to self, but unknown to others, this is the private self. These are our secrets. And then the parts that we don't know and the parts that others don't know, this is our potential, the unknown. And the idea is that growth is to make the public self move more into the unknown self. So we have fewer blind spots and we have fewer secrets. And how do we do that? Well, our blind spots we reduce by getting feedback. We do 360s at work. We ask friends, family for feedback, although they might not be that honest with feedback. Or we go into therapy or find a coach, because there, hopefully, you are going to get honest feedback. And then with the private self, how do we make that area smaller so we move more into the unknown self, into our potential? Well, we're more honest. We don't hold so many secrets. We don't fear other people's reactions to our honesty. And a wonderful book that really changed my thinking around all this was a book called Radical Honesty by Brad Blanton. Really changed my thinking in how much we hide and how liberating and freeing it is just to be more open about what we struggle with in life. So that's the Johari window. It's a nice model that summarizes this journey on self-development. So that's a bit about growing self-awareness, and it really is at the core of this journey that limerence has opened the doorway to. It's to start thinking about who I am. And as the Greek philosophers used to say, know thyself. I really believe there is something profoundly important in that. On our own individual paths to individuate, to become separate whole, fully functioning human beings. And limerence is the gift that is showing you that quest, that need for that journey.